Hey everybody, here's another lecture on public opinion. We're now moving squarely into the manipulate arrow of the diagram that is part of the notes for the first lecture of this week. I already gestured in the previous lecture on public opinion measurements and campaign politics how it is that the public opinion industry plays a role in shaping public opinion, but today I'm going to look squarely at shaping public opinion. There's really two ways in which public opinion is attempted to be shaped. One is by campaigns that are attempting to convince people to vote for their candidate. That's a very direct, common, and important form of shaping public opinion. And as I indicated in the last lecture, that's a form of competitive and common manipulation. That's what democratic electoral politics are actually about. It's about two or more candidates competing to successfully manipulate public opinion. Now, I indicated this last time, but I want to say it again, that I use the term manipulated in a kind of a neutral way, or I try to use it in a neutral way, although that word definitely carries with it a strongly negative connotation to most people. We don't want to be manipulated. Manipulated sounds like you're being controlled. And much like the word propaganda, which I've spoken about in several lectures, propaganda is a terrible thing. It's about controlling people's minds and giving them only the kind of information and messages that would get them to draw one set of conclusions. Propaganda is only problematic when there is one source of propaganda. When there are competing sources of propaganda, it still is a kind of a ugly, nasty thing to be doing to try to give people information that pushes them only in one direction, rather than giving them a well-rounded diet of information that allows them to make up their own mind. But when we live in a world of competitive messaging, and there's actually realistic access to a well-rounded set of propagandas, then it's maybe not exactly the same thing as kind of having a neutral environment of all the relevant information available to us, but it can come to much the same thing. Manipulation is, I would say, similar. In fact, manipulation is just another way of talking about propaganda. As long as we have a competitive environment where there are multiple forms of manipulation going on, and we know that what the various actors are trying to do is to get us to come to their conclusion. Vote for Hillary Clinton, vote for Donald Trump, vote for Jeff Sessions, vote for whatever the guy's name was, Jones. I don't think it was actually Sessions and Jones, right? Anyway, I'm getting off the track already, but you get the idea that as long as we know that people are trying to get us to take their opinion, form the opinion that they're thrusting at us, and we have access to a variety of different sources of information, then manipulation is really not problematic or nefarious. It might not be awesome, right? It might be the ideal world is one where candidates say, okay, here's our message and here's our candidate, and vote for him or don't. And the other candidates all do the same thing. But that's not only an ideal world that we don't live in, it's really not even necessarily the best way to have a democratic electoral system. Now, the other thing that goes on in our political system, besides campaigns seeking to shape public opinion in the specific direction of vote for my candidate, is that we have public service campaigns. And these come in a variety of different forms. One is the government, as well as interest groups, attempt to convince people to do what they think of as the right thing or support a particular issue or policy or cause. Public service campaigns differ from candidate campaigns because what these are doing is they're trying to get us to buy some kind of idea to form support around an issue or some kind of policy, or to, in fact, shape our behavior in a particular way, right? Any kind of anti-smoking campaign is a public service campaign. Now, once again, while it could seem like, these public service campaigns are either good because they are intended to, get us to do something that's good for us, or bad because they're manipulating us into behaving in a particular way, all of these campaigns in our society take place within a competitive environment, right? When the government is advertising us to engage in a certain kind of behavior that is healthier for us, right? Don't smoke. That takes place in a competitive environment where there are also messages from the mainstream media, from various non-mainstream forms of media, as well as advertising from tobacco companies, though that advertising is highly attenuated now by law. But there still are, and there's movies where people smoke, which makes it look sexy. There are counter messages. There are competing messages that we're getting. And so I've lumped basically all of these different types of campaigns under the term public service campaigns, and maybe that's not the most evocative term for it, but I just wanted to distinguish it between candidate campaigns, which are asking for a very specific thing, vote for our person, versus these public service campaigns, which are, support our issue, donate to our cause, engage in this kind of behavior, come out to this protest, do this thing. There are a variety of different, essentially, calls to action in public service campaigns. The call to action in a candidate campaign is very simple: vote for our person. In all of these cases, the object is to manipulate people into doing a particular thing. And I say object, and this is where, back to the model from the first lecture of this week, that the public is now not the subject of public opinion, the public opinion industry anymore, but the object of it. And this is a different group of people. Pollsters are part of the industry of understanding public opinion. They take the public as a subject of study. Now, as we've seen already, and particularly in the public opinion measurements and campaign politics lecture from last time, that information is very useful to the other part of the public opinion industry, which is that which is engaged in attempting to shape or manipulate public opinion. So the information gathered is really valuable. And I talked about that quite a bit, and so I'm not going to go through the 3 different types of public opinion measurements anymore this week. I assume that it's locked in by now after several different lectures on it, coming at it from different angles. Now I'm going to actually look specifically at what is it that the public opinion industry does with this information to serve the client's desires to be masters of public opinion, to shape it, to manipulate it, to essentially win the public opinion battle. And I think it's not a bad metaphor to think about it as a battle, that our media landscape is a kind of at least part of it, is a kind of ongoing battle to shape public opinion. Now, this clearly goes on outside of politics. This clearly goes on. This is what marketing and advertising is in the private sector. If you're advertising your beer, if you're advertising your car, if you're advertising your television show, then you are seeking to get people to engage in a particular kind of behavior. You're looking to manipulate public opinion. We know this about advertising, and I think that while there are differences between advertising products and advertising candidates and advertising ideas and behaviors, they do have a lot of similarities. And they are all done through the conduit of the public opinion industry. Some of the same people who make advertisements for jeans and cars also make advertisements for candidates. Some people who make advertisements for candidates only specialize in that. That's the way any industry is. So there are some practitioners who are general practitioners, and there are other practitioners who are very specialized. There are some people who actually go from advertising for products to advertising for good behaviors. People go in, they cut their teeth in the PR industry making ads to sell people beer and jeans, and then they, at some point in their life, decide either to go to a different company or change their company's orientation to either completely adopt doing things like getting people to stop smoking and getting people to stop having gambling problems and getting people to stop beating people who are in their home. All of these kinds of things can be done with the same set of professional tools. So, what are those professional tools? The first I'm going to look at, as the notes show you, what is the problem that is faced in shaping public opinion, right? What are the obstacles in this arrow of manipulation to actually succeeding? Of course, one of them, and I don't have it on here because I keep saying it, and I think that I don't have it in any of the notes, or I guess I have it in some of the notes, but it's a highly competitive environment. One of the problems that public opinion manipulators face is that they're competing with other people who are attempting to manipulate them. Now, what are the more specific problems that even a single manipulator of public opinion, shaper of public opinion, is going to face? Here they are for candidate campaigns. The problem is that potential voters are easily distracted. They're unlikely to absorb much information. They're likely to have their minds made up already. That didn't used to be as true as it is now. It's always been true that some segment of the electorate had their minds made up and were completely unsusceptible to manipulation within the campaign, because either they just were going to vote in one way or another, or the prior forms of manipulation had taken such deep root that they were no longer susceptible to kind of cyclical manipulation. People are also wary about being manipulated by advertising. That's also something that is, in our lifetimes very common, but in the 20th century, that developed. In 1955, Americans were not as wary of being manipulated by advertising as they were by 1985, and now we're definitely very wary. This is one of the reasons why using the word manipulation is problematic, though I use it on purpose to point out that manipulation can have a sort of morally neutral use of it, but we all do respond very viscerally to the concept of being manipulated. We're wary of it, and that actually makes it hard. If the job you're trying to do, if people are resistant to it, then that makes your job harder. Add to that, in this particular area of shaping public opinion, the campaign, people are distrustful of politicians. And again, this has become stronger and stronger over the decades, starting with about Watergate, and actually maybe starting with Vietnam. In the 1960s, distrust of politicians, while it always existed to a certain extent, went from being a kind of a marginal problem to being a central problem. So you're running a campaign, and the people you're trying to manipulate, the people whose votes you're trying to win as part of the competitive democratic electoral landscape, they are, one, distrustful of being manipulated. They're wary of being manipulated. They're distrustful of people who would try to form their opinion for them. And they are distrustful of politicians and politicos in general. And so when you're trying to get people to vote for your person, these are all obstacles that you have to face. Now, how do campaigns solve that problem? Before I get to the bullet points here in the notes, I just want to note that one of the ways that they help solve that problem is by using public opinion measurements as a resource. And I would refer you back to the previous lecture for all of the things that I said about how those three different forms of public opinion measurement, while they are themselves potentially flawed, there's reasons to be skeptical of them, they do and don't work to a great extent, but they are very useful. They're a resource. And what those resources provide to campaign specialists and strategists is the ability to know what kind of content to fill their messaging with and who to aim that content at. Now, today I want to talk about what that messaging is like. Campaigns rely typically on storytelling over information, right? This is where everybody who's ever run a campaign or worked on a campaign has told me the same thing. Political campaigning is essentially storytelling. It's not making sure that voters are aware of the issues that your candidate stands for, or that they're aware of the arguments for the ballot measure that you're proposing, or that they know where your candidate stands, or what your candidate's experience is, or what that candidate has done for their constituents. All of that is information that campaigns want to get across. But a campaign is not primarily an information stream. It's not something that is a report to people, because human beings are fundamentally storytellers and story hearers. We are story creatures. It's built into our psychology that stories speak to us more powerfully than kind of reported information. And a story, of course, has information in it, but the primary orientation of a story is to take you through a journey that really, in a way, allows you to come to your own powerful conclusion because you've been on that journey along with the storyteller. Great storytellers get you to forget that you are not in the story. Great storytellers get you to not only relate to the hero of the story, but to actually put yourself in their shoes. So good campaigns will actually create for you, through a variety of means, the story of this candidate. And it may not be the story of the candidate like their biography. What the story is, it's a story about what is going to happen to you when you vote for this candidate, or what's going to happen to you when you vote for the opposing candidate. Now, what is the sort of mechanism that this story activates? It activates emotions, and this is one of the things about stories. Stories rely for their momentum, for their power, for their compellingness. They rely on emotions. Again, they have information, and they have visuals, and they have facts, and there's plot developments and plot twists and all that stuff. But they're fundamentally, all of that stuff is intended to activate our emotions, to make us afraid, to make us sad, to make us hopeful, to make us joyous, to make us laugh, to make us cry, to make us think, to make us, feel contemplative, or to make us apathetic. Whatever it is, whatever the storyteller wants you to do after you have gone through the journey of the hero of the story from the inside, is to essentially, there's a call to action inherent in every story. In a campaign, the call to action is very straightforward. It's singular. It's vote for our person. The emotions are what carry you from the place you are right now to that call to action. Both positive and negative emotions work, though, as I say in the notes here, and I think most people know this, negative emotions tend to work better. And that's, there's an evolutionary reason for that. If you're afraid of something and it's a threat and you're afraid of it and you run away from it, you will survive and you will send your genes on into the next generation. If you're afraid of something and it's not a threat and you run away from it, then you still survive. And your running away was unnecessary, but it's better safe than sorry in a sense. Positive emotions actually ask us to, instead of run away from something, to embrace something. And that, while that's necessary in the evolutionary environment, you have to have positive appeals. You have to find a mate, and you have to survive, and you have to get food. There are positive things that evolution requires of us in order for our genes to survive, but the positive tends to be less powerful than the negative. So a common story to tell, to put a voter is, okay, if you vote for our opponent, this terrible thing is going to happen to you. That's the story that is behind many campaigns. Though the story is often, and the stories can be complicated, it doesn't have to be a singular story. Campaigns don't just have a singular story they tell. They may rely on storytelling, but they don't have a singular story. Tell the story that here's what happens to your life when you vote for our person and our person wins. This is what will happen. The Trump campaign did an excellent job of both negative and positive storytelling, right? Here's what happens when Hillary Clinton wins. And it's essentially disaster and mayhem. Here's what happens when Donald Trump wins. It's that we get the wrecking ball goes to the Capitol and tears things down. The swamp gets drained. Here are all the things. Your life will be better in this way. Jobs will come back. The story that the Trump campaign told, both the positive and negative stories, reverberated with an awful lot of people. And with enough people, not the majority of voters, because Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, but with enough people in the right states that he was able to win. Whether you believe in the Electoral College or not, or have a problem with the fact that Trump didn't win the national popular vote, his campaign is a great example of, like, in its nakedest form and in an extremely effective form, how campaigns rely on storytelling. Another thing besides emotional appeal that makes for great successful stories is memorable visuals. And those visuals are actually literal visuals in some cases. It's a television advertisement that shows something. But visuals can also be described or can be evoked, right? So if you hear a radio ad, that is telling you a story about something terrible that's going to happen if you vote for the other candidate, you're going to bring up a visual in your mind. We're very visual creatures, and the radio ad itself, even though it's in a audio format only, will be intended, at least the effective ones, the people who know what they're doing, will be intended to evoke visuals for you. The next bullet point, repetition of a singular message. This doesn't mean that campaigns only have one message. Often campaigns have multiple messages, but there's two features to this. One, each of those messages should be repeated over and over in that singular form. When you say the same thing in 5 different ways, then people don't necessarily know that you're saying the same thing 5 different times. There's an extent to which human beings are relatively fallible. We're unlikely to absorb much information. We're easily distracted. When the same thing is told to us in 5 different ways, instead of 5 times in the same way, it's less likely to grab hold of us. But also the singular message, all of the sub-messages should relate in an easy to understand way back to the singular message. That's the theme of the campaign. One of the problems with Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 was that she actually switched campaign slogans multiple times, and it was hard to know Stronger Together, I'm with her, those are at least 2. I think there were at least 2 or 3 others. Part of the problem was the campaign couldn't figure out, well, what is our strongest, best message? So they kept changing, and that's actually a common fallacy that happens, is that campaigns seeking to find the perfect singular message actually end up sending out a stream of confusing messages to the viewer and to the listener. The final bit of what campaigns do, and this speaks to the both wary about being manipulated and distrustful of politicians, is that if you can use free versus paid media for the dominant supply of your messaging to the public, you're going to more successfully get inside people's fortresses, right? Their brains are a fortress. They're wary of being manipulated. They're distrustful of politicians. And what that means is that you need to sneak in. You need a Trojan horse. And while people are distrustful of free media now too, and the whole fake news thing has complicated this problem, what you want to do is you want to get into people's brains the best way you can. And these days, still, even with the whole fake media problem, fake news problem, free media, things that are not paid advertisements, are the better ways. It's sometimes called earned media. And so campaigns in a big way are essentially an ongoing daily circus or show that tells a story that the campaign hopes will be told for it by other people, by the mainstream media, by social media, by bloggers. And of course, you use paid media to supplement free media because that actually repeats the singular message in 2 different streams. And if people are seeing the same thing repeated both in the free and in the paid media, that's going to have a much greater success of sticking with them and getting them to accept the call to action. Vote for our person. So that's how campaigns work. Now, if you're interested in the greater mechanics, the more detailed nitty-gritty mechanics, there is a course, and I'll be teaching it next spring, in how to win a U.S. election campaign. And there are a number of videos that are available actually on my YouTube page from the remote version of that class from last term about how to win campaigns. How is it specifically that campaigns go about doing this? So there's a lot more detail on this than can be touched on in this particular half-hour lecture in this particular class. So if you're interested in that, there's a lot more to know. But that's the basic outlines. Now, moving to the second category, how do those who want to shape or manipulate our opinion in a direction, the call to action is not just vote for our person, but support this cause, donate money, come to this protest, engage in this particular healthier behavior, whatever it happens to cease doing something that's bad for you or bad for the world. While there's a more diverse set of calls to action available, the same problems exist. People are easily distracted, they're unlikely to absorb much information, they're likely to have their minds made up already, particularly if you're asking them to change a behavior, right? If you're saying to somebody, stop smoking, their mind is already made up that smoking is great because they're doing it. And even if they know smoking sucks, their body is made up, right? And their mind kind of just sits idly off to the side. So you're still facing that if their minds are not made up, their body is already made up into smoking or into eating a poor diet or whatever it happens to be. And again, people are wary about being manipulated by advertising, and there's not quite this same direct distrust of politicians. But the wariness about being manipulated by advertising is still strong. People don't want to think that the things they do and believe are a result of others getting them to do it. We want very much to believe that our own choices are a result of our own free will. even if it's clearly ridiculous to think that that's what happens, that it's clear that we're a set of influences and, both external as well as evolutionarily hardwired inclinations. We want to believe this sort of idea that we have free will. So that is the biggest obstacle to get through. Now, what are the solutions? The solutions in a public service campaign of whatever stripe, whether it's getting you to support a cause, to back a policy, to donate money to an organization, to start doing a good behavior, to stop doing a bad behavior, the solutions are to work with an emotional appeal, give a simple message, don't ask for too much, right? Don't make the call to action too complicated. The great thing about a political campaign is that the call to action is very straightforward. Vote for our person or vote for our ballot measure. It's automatically simple. When you're trying to shape public opinion on an issue or a policy or a behavior, the tendency, because issues and policies and behaviors are complex, the tendency is going to be to want to bring complexity to the call to action, right? Instead of just saying exercise and you will be healthier and lose weight, the temptation is to say, well, exercise and here's how much and here's the kind, and you also need to eat a balanced diet and your emotional state is really important. Like, the truth is that physical fitness is a complex outcome of a variety of different behaviors, and it's very easy when trying to achieve a goal like make people more physically fit to complicate the message, because the reality of the world is complex. But if you're looking actually to shape people's behaviors and attitudes, the simpler the message, the better. The next bullet point, powerful reframing of a common or undesirable view. This is what most public service campaigns are. They're not trying to preach to the choir. They don't need to convince people who are already convinced. You have to assume that the people you're trying to reach don't support whatever call to action is that you're looking for. And so what you need to do is figure out what the common/undesirable view is and reframe it in a powerful way. Once again, and I put storytelling here last instead of first, is storytelling is part of this, but it's done in a different way. Again, the story needs to be simple. And what is ideal is that the audience completes the scene on their own. You begin a story and they tell the rest of it for themselves. With campaigning, really the story is told for them from beginning to end, because you want to make sure that the audience understands, like, okay, if you vote for our person, here's what will happen. When you're looking to influence behavior in this sort of more subtle, diverse way, getting people to support a cause or donate money, etc., it's best, since the call to action is more vague, right? For an election, it's like on November 3rd, vote for our person. This call to action is more like, please do this thing at some point, right? So it's better if the audience can complete the scene on their own rather than having it handed to them. Because not only when you have something handed to you are you likely to activate your wariness of being manipulated, it also is like it comes and you're like, yeah, oh, I really ought to do that, but then I'm not going to do it, right? Even though I know it's the right thing. And then guilt kicks in, and guilt turns into procrastination, and procrastination turns into never doing the thing that the call to action is trying to goad you into. I'm going to go through quickly 3 different public service campaigns to just talk about how it is they do what they do to within the lines of these bullet points I have. So here is a public service announcement, and it's clear: stop the violence, don't drink and drive. Right? Now, one of the things about this is that it's clearly an emotional appeal. Right? There's anger and fear being activated here. There are 2 characters in this story. One is the fist, and the other is the face. And you, as the audience, will take on the emotions of both of these characters immediately, right? You look at this and you can feel the desire to punch, and then you can also feel the hurt and the pain and the fear of being punched in this particular way. Now, the message is very simple: don't drink and drive. And obviously, it is, that's a very familiar, simple message to us. What's the reframing that goes on here? This is I would say it's subtle, but it's very important. The imagery here of the face being a small car and the fist being a big truck, And of course, which one do you think is the drunk driver? It's the puncher, not the punchee. The reframing of the message here is that drinking and driving is the same as physically assaulting somebody, right? It's very easy to abstract away certain behaviors from their human consequences and to say, oh yeah, that's not really, like, it doesn't hurt people to do that. That's one of the things that's very difficult about getting people to, socially distance and wear masks over the long haul, is that it's so abstract, like flattening the curve and preventing this widespread network of infection. We know that that's right, but it's very difficult to put a human face on that, because each person that we walk past who does or doesn't have a mask on may or may not, and probably doesn't have the coronavirus, and so it's so abstract. The same thing can be true for a bad and very obviously destructive behavior like drinking and then getting into an automobile. We don't necessarily put together that act with the human consequences. This is saying when you drink and drive, you're actually physically punching someone on the face, right? Metaphorically. That's the point, is it's a metaphorical reframing. But it's a very powerful message that instead of thinking, oh, I know drinking and driving is bad, I've had this message since I was a teenager, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. That's the common message. And everyone knows that's bad and undesirable. It's not like anybody doesn't know that drinking and driving is dangerous. The same thing is true of smoking. People know that smoking is bad for them, but they still do it. People know drunk driving is bad for the world, and they still do it. This reframes it as an assault on another human being. And when you're in a car, you don't see the face of the other person. So this particular public service campaign is, I would say, the emotional appeal is obvious. The simple message is obvious and also extremely familiar. It's the reframing that is so powerful and useful. All right, this is another great public service announcement, and the idea here is what? Quickly, you should be able to tell that this is about gun control. Even before you read anything, you can see the gun is a very large and powerful presence. Now, by using children, it amplifies the size of the gun. It also immediately creates a story of a school shooting, and we all have so many different associations with school shootings that this activates an immediate story. And this doesn't finish the story for us. What this does is this lets us finish the story for ourselves, because that little girl with the machine gun is not shooting anybody, but we're imagining we finish the story for ourselves. We don't need to have this. Now, the text here is also important. One child is holding something that's been banned in America to protect them. Guess which one? This is where there's the powerful reframing. It's like, wait, this kid's holding a Kinder chocolate egg, right? And it's been banned. I don't know why. I think maybe because it uses raw egg in it or something. I forget exactly why the Kinder chocolate egg is banned. The assault, clearly in this picture, which of these two things is more dangerous? We don't have any trouble. So this is a powerful reframing, and it's a simple message, a very simple message. Ban these guns. Now, there's a complexity, a sort of really unavoidable complexity to the whole gun control issue. What gun control measures should be enacted, which ones are going to be effective, which ones are going to curtail our freedom, which ones are going to actually make us less safe rather than more safe. But you cannot take up that true complexity in any kind of public service campaign. You have to simplify the message. And this is a very powerful one, and you can stop the video, or you can just look at the PDF file that has this and just ponder this for a really long time. But you don't have to ponder it. It tells you a story immediately. It powerfully reframes the gun control debate as like, not is it freedom versus government control. It's it's a question of like, we already do things to protect kids. Why are we not doing the more important thing, the bigger thing? Which of these is the bigger threat? Clearly the gun is the bigger threat, and yet it's the one that has not been banned. All right, final one, and this potentially is a little bit disturbing. I know that I find it a little bit disturbing, but it's a really, I would say, a great example of taking our, taking our common view and getting us to reframe the message. Here, when you just glance at it really quickly, this is a picture of a teenager, a teen girl probably, with a phone in their back pocket. So familiar. We see this on the street all the time, in ads all the time. what jumps out at you after that first initial, like, oh, this is a common scene, is the horrible bony hand cupping this poor girl's butt. And this is a clear act of like sexual assault that's imposed very powerfully into this familiar scene. So this is a powerful reframing of a common view. Like, yep, teenagers with the phone in their pocket. Sure, see it all the time. Goddamn kids and their phones. They're attached to their phones. And then, ooh. And again, this is a great example of finishing the story for yourself. All right, this starts the story. The hand begins the story, and we naturally, and it's a very powerful negative emotion, especially for any parent. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and this like speaks to a story that I've already replayed through my head any number of times. And so the message and the text is very small here. Sexual predators can hide in your child's smartphone, right? That's actually not the message. That's not the call to action. The call to action, we finish the story ourselves. We provide the call to action ourselves. The call to action, it's very much based on a fear-based appeal, is holy shit, pay attention to what our kids are doing on their phones. I have to go, like I saw this when I was researching these for this lecture, and I almost immediately was just like, I have to go and see what my kids have been doing on their phone. And then I was like, oh wait, I check in periodically and I talk to them about this stuff. I'm already doing a lot of this stuff. But it very much, I finished the story immediately. It was a powerful reframing of like kids and their phones. Oh my God, they're on their phones. Devices are rotting the youth, the minds of the youth. There's way more that's being told in this single frame. It's a story that hijacks that normal story of, oh God, my kids, they just text all day and they're on Instagram and oh God, just videos constantly. It's rotting their brains. This is saying, oh, wait a minute. Here's a different, much more dangerous story. You thought that story was bad? This story is even worse. Okay, so that is the way in which these stories are told, in which public service campaigns, and these are just 3 examples, and you could look around on the internet, just look at a bunch of stuff, and if you want to practice this, like take these bullet points that are in the notes and go apply them to the things that you see. You can apply them to even regular advertising as well. The call to action is much simpler, which is buy our product or use our service. But when the call to action is something that is, actually quite a hard call to action, right? Asking somebody to buy a pair of jeans or buy a particular beer or buy a car, that's actually a relatively easy call to action. Same as asking somebody to vote for your person. That's a straightforward call to action. Public service campaigns of whatever kind, whether it's donate money, engage in a certain kind of behavior, stop engaging in a certain kind of behavior, support our group, adopt our policy, it's a much more complicated and difficult type of call to action. But the methods of shaping public opinion, while there are big obstacles to getting people to adopt these views on their own, they are done in very effective ways. Okay, so that is how to shape public opinion.